Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. So, David, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Good, and we've had a little bit of a break with holidays and various other things that have been going on. And I'm rocking a new turtleneck, which I think gives me an extra piece of credibility. So I've got that on.
I still think a dog collar would be better, but you know.
Exactly. Now, listen, we were triggered off by something I'm just going to read out, which came across my news stream, and I'll just read it out word for word. And the headline is, "Stop moaning about hours. City chief tells junior bankers to suck up 80-hour weeks because millions of poor working mothers work harder for far less." Xavier Rolet said, "If bankers do not like their hours, then do something else." The Frenchman, which I always worry about why they need to say that, but Xavier advised bosses to hire poor, hungry kids instead of entitled people. And I think that's relevant in the context of him saying that because he grew up on a Parisian council estate and is probably coming at it from the point of, get people from that space, my friend, and they'll bite your hand off to work as long as you like, etc. So it triggered us off for a conversation around, well, there's a whole load of things here. What, at what point am I maybe in service to a business instead of maybe being of service, all the way through to work-life balance, resilience, what's fair? And, if one part of the world commercially is outpacing us because we want to live a certain way, then, so there's lots of dynamics here for us to kind of get into.
Well, I think that when I read the thing that you sent me to read about this, my mind went in several different directions, because I think that the article, in a sense, conflates a number of different issues. And the first is the notion of entitlement. People in extremely well-paid jobs, there's been complaints for many, many decades, probably for most of my life, that not everyone has equal access to them. And there's a social justice issue there, just like sort of places at some of the more prestigious universities and so on. So there's the sense of entitlement. The second is about hunger. Do you want to appoint people who are in a sense hungry, and therefore they're more likely to work very, very hard for you? By the way, brackets, that gives me an alarm bell, because that seems to me to be one of the preconditions for abuse. That if people are going to kind of do anything for the privilege of working for any organization, that's open to the worst kind of exploitation and abuse. So I think that's a second theme. And then the third theme for me is, why is it that mums work so hard, as the banker was saying, and do it uncomplainingly most of the time? And it's probably because there's an awful lot of love in what they do. That there is a love of what they do, and a love in what they do, and a love for the people that they are working with, namely their children, their spouses, and so on. So it feels to me as if there's a bunch of different issues that are worth disentangling there.
Yeah, and there is, that maxim, if you find a job that you love, you never work another day again. I kind of get that. And if it's something that somebody loves and they want to do, well, they can work as long as they like, as long as it's a personal choice and it's not damaging them. I kind of get that. But you're right. There's something here about, you want bang for your buck. You want to pay an employer money, and you want to get bang for your buck. But I get this sense of, entitlement's an interesting thing. And abuse may be the far end of that spectrum where it becomes abusive. But actually, at what point is it almost like you're going into service? You're if I'm going to pay you this money, then you're almost signing your rights away. I'll decide what your workload is. There's a line, because if I'm paying you this much, it's all about your rights. But if I'm paying you this much, then you kind of, that's it. There's no room for you to have. Is it entitlement or is it just an opinion?
Well, it's there's that old song, isn't it? That I sold my soul to the company store, and it seems to me that if you live in the 21st century, and if you understand the rate and the pace at which things are changing all over the place in unpredictable ways, then what you want to do is to create an expectation amongst your colleagues that they'll all have their ears open, their eyes open as to what's happening, and will be feeding in thoughts and insights and ideas and creative possibilities, because no one has a monopoly on wisdom. So the last thing in the world you want to do is so to subjugate your workforce that they lose the ability to think independently. And if they think independently, they might want to think independently about the way the culture of the company has sort of shaken out, about ways that we can do things better too, not just ways in which we can serve our clients better. So I think that's the first danger for me in that whole attitude, which is I want people to have an opinion. I want them to have their eyes and ears open. I want them to be feeding in possibilities for us all to consider. And yes, once we've made a decision, we maybe all got to kind of get behind it and get the kind of alignment to be strong. But in the run up to that, let's have everyone with a thought, an idea, a possibility, and let's encourage them to have a voice, because that way, when we come to a decision together, we'll end up more committed to it.
I buy into that 100%. And I think what I get is a sense of this word entitlement is linked to what I see on social media, where there is a sense, particularly from maybe a lot of the academia positions, particularly in the US, which I'm seeing a lot of now, where people are playing with pronouns, they're playing with their kind of their place in society, and they want to almost control the narrative through an intellectual position. And that seems to hit up against the inverted commas, the real world of, yeah, it sounds great. And technically you're probably not wrong, but welcome to life. Yes. Yeah, there aren't any safe spaces. It's, you might be spoken to in a manner that you find difficult. There might be conversations around topics that you don't enjoy, and it won't be removed from the conversation just because you don't like it, etc. So this entitlement thing wasn't a word that I heard until relatively recently. Maybe I'd have just sort of, too big for your boots, you'd have heard, or something like that. Yep. They're becoming too big for their boots. Now that's changed to, they're entitled. So they're coming out of college or university, whatever it is, and they're stepping into £100,000, $100,000 jobs. What more do they want?
Yes.
And so I wonder if there's a sense amongst the people in senior roles that when they're particularly seeing maybe in some of these kind of American-based sections of their organization, there is this almost undercurrent of social liberal, if you don't like it, it's entitled. If you do like it, it's trying to change society.
Well,
I just wonder if that's in play.
Yeah, it may well be, but there's an idea in psychology that might be useful here. Have you come across this term equity theory?
Do you know what? I've heard it. I'm not even going to pretend to explain it properly. So over to you to do that.
It's the idea is in a nutshell is this: I have a view about how much I put into anything, anything, a sports team, my home, my work, whatever it may be. I put in X. I want to get out something that's proportionate to X. Yeah. And if I don't, I feel that that's inequitable, and I'll try to reduce the inequity. Now, it's been used as an explanation for things like shoplifting. People who work all kinds of abusive hours for very little money in shops, find that that they can reduce the inequity by nicking a few bits and bobs, and sort of taking them home and in that way kind of reducing the inequity. Or just simply, I want to work a little less. I want to work fewer hours, but I don't want to reduce my pay because already I think that I'm putting in more than I'm getting out. Now, The thing about equity theory, however, is that it's all subjectively defined. There's no objective measure of that. So it's all about my perception. And what I think that banker was saying is that his perception is that people should be jolly grateful to earn, $100,000 straight out of college. And therefore, we can do whatever we like to you because we're already overpaying you. Now that's dangerous. It's dangerous on two counts. One is because, as I say, it's abusive, but the other is it doesn't take account of the subjectivity, because equity theory is not just about money. It's about reward generally. It's about what I put in versus what I get out. And reward can be measured in lots of different ways. So, for example, time off might be the bit of reward that someone has a strong need for to redress that balance. Because what's the point of earning a stack of money if you've no opportunity to enjoy it or spend it?
And again, this is why I love these conversations, because it's sometimes the conversation itself doesn't always lead to an answer. It leads to maybe more questions or more thoughts. And I look at this gentleman who's 60 plus years old, and I wonder, without knowing, of course, is to say that word entitled indicates a kind of jab. It indicates a kind of, some form of attack. I'm not going to be verbally abusive, but I'm going to let you all know what I think by using this particular word. Because I didn't say I think people need to, as they just not get too big for their boots, or just remember that they, don't come here if you don't want to. That's the deal, right? If the interview process has been fair, listen, it's hard hours. You can do 80-hour weeks here on a regular basis. Don't be surprised if that's the expectation. If it's all there in black and white, how is that abusive? You just go somewhere else. It's like joining the army and saying the nasty sergeant major shouting at me. Well, what did you think was going to happen? Now, of course, you can turn into abusive behavior, but let's not turn what is relatively agreed into something post-contract.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, if you think about it legalistically, think of it as a contract.
Yeah,
you lose the subjectivity of it. Because I think that's the thing that when I started, as I say, my career, I'm a little older than you, but as I say, when you and I started our careers, but certainly when I started my career, exploitative and abusive bosses were much more common than they are now. There's all sorts of legal steps that have been taken to redress some of that, but also basically good people won't go and work for people that they don't enjoy working for. They just won't. They've got choice. They'll go somewhere else. So my sense is that the most abusive bosses are most likely to end up with the least capable people working for them, who they've got to flog into the ground to get a decent day's work out of, because they haven't got that kind of spare horsepower to put in. If you want good people working for you, who have got loads of capacity to make great contributions, the reward package they want is not just about money. So I think that's the thing I would want to say to that fine gentleman, who might be the world's greatest humanitarian, but certainly on the surface of it, what I'd want to say to him is, don't just think of reward as money. So and one of the little exercises you could get people to do who work for him is to say, what would you like if I were to cut your pay from 100,000 a year to 80,000 a year? What would you be willing to sacrifice for that 20,000? And they might say, well, I'd like to work, 3/4 of the hours that I'm working at the moment. Or I actually had a colleague who worked in my consultancy who kept saying to me, please don't raise my pay, but give me more time off. They wanted a kind of a slightly more balanced life. And in order to get that, they were willing to sacrifice money to get time. Yeah. So one of the questions I would want him to ask his people is, what would you be willing to sacrifice for an extra week of leave? Those sorts of questions. But the other thing I wanted to say is that the work itself, you and I have talked a little bit about this before. Where do you get your buzz from? What's the joy of working for an organization? certain kinds of work that people do, they literally love. And whilst they wouldn't do it for nothing, or couldn't do it for nothing because they've got no way of feeding their family, but they would certainly happily work for less and still enjoy the work they do because they love the task itself. Many musicians work for very little money, but they love the music. You know, I get a chance to play with a number of jazz musicians who are worth 10 times what they earn. Absolutely. But they do it because they just love what they do. And my sense is that you've got to think about reward much more broadly and then have a conversation, because the reward has to be perceived to be valuable, not to be told that what you're getting is valuable. Because in a sense, if I were to paraphrase that guy, he's saying, I'm giving you all this money. What more could you ask for? You've got to do exactly what I tell you.
And you know, I mean, because we can't see into people's brains, right? When the day comes, beautiful thing. But until then, I also wonder if people quite literally don't know what they're getting into. They leave an academic institution. A lot of these people do come from those places. They leave with high-level degrees and they step into the workplace. So they have no benchmark reference, really, other than maybe what they've been told for previous experiences in other jobs. And there's something going on here, which is we're going to offer you status. You work for us. So you get to go home and in your life go, I work for, boom. You know that's going to help your career in terms of your CV. We're going to pay you a significant amount of money, which means you're going to live well, which is going to, again, improve, you know, your ego, or maybe just even if it's not that, it's a stepping stone to what you want in life. And there's lots of little kind of hooks there that, you know, got my degree, look at the status, look at the money I'm earning. That doesn't mean you become greedy, but if you're that way, because, you know, they're of an age, they're coming out of university, wow, look at me, you know, haven't I done well? But also when you've lived like that for a little bit, you know, and you've got that accommodation in that nice place and you're wearing clothes of a certain standard and you blah, 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 blah. It's harder to give it up, right? Because it's linked into your identity and how you've told the world that you are. Now, I don't think any HR department is sitting there being that Machiavellian. And if they are, I've never met one that does that. But actually, part of that conversation is, what are we actually doing to people when we give them this? Yes. Because that's part of, let's be honest about what we're really doing to somebody that might be 23 or 24, whatever that age is when they come out. They're basically clueless. They're bright, but they're basically clueless. And we're affecting them, you know, in terms of that, you know, that Maslow kind of, you know, we're taking care of a lot of things, but then we're also creating a dependency. You know, where would I go if it wasn't here? Because we can say, oh, they can go anywhere. But there's only a few companies like us at the top of the tree, you know. Yes. And so I think there's something there as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think also that expectations of what you're talking about, expectations adjust. You know, so I came out of university, say, or if I were a contemporary of my, you know, kids, they come out of university with an expectation which is here. And part of that expectation is how much they will earn. They find they can earn so much more, but instantly, or certainly very soon, that expectation adjusts upwards. It seldom adjusts downwards. It adjusts upwards, and it becomes the norm. So now getting that amount of money is no longer motivating to me. I've got to earn more. So it's a seduction. And what I think happens is that upward adjustment of expectations creates a kind of scramble to keep getting more of the same. But actually it doesn't satisfy. What people learn a little later in their careers, as you know very well, is that you've got to have a kind of balanced portfolio of reward, which is to do with time, it's to do with choices, it's to do with status, it's to do with being appreciated, it's to do with money, it's to do with time off, etc., etc. There's a whole kind of slew of things that I need in order to live a kind of rounded and satisfying life. And I'll tell you a real story. in my consulting career, the business, the Edgecombe Consulting Group that Jenny and my wife and I started, for a while, we had an office in Hong Kong. And my colleague in Hong Kong did a piece of work for a big stockbroking firm in Hong Kong. And the assignment was, why are our best people leaving? That was in a nutshell. And so the guy running the assignment went to talk to the people who were working in the firm and went to talk to the people who had recently left the firm and asked them the obvious questions, what was satisfying, what's not, what's frustrating, why do you stay, why do you leave, and all that sort of stuff. And he came up with a very simple answer. He went back to the client and he said, people are leaving you because they don't feel appreciated. To which the client almost choked on his coffee and said, what do you mean we don't appreciate them? Do you realize that those 5 people who have just left us were earning $1 million a year? What do you mean we didn't value them? So, tail between his legs, my colleague went back to those 5 people and said, what do you mean, you're not appreciated? The answer was, I will never forget the answer. They said to a man, we want to be appreciated. That's just money.
You've put a value on it.
Money. Yeah.
Yeah.
That doesn't show that you value me. That shows simply that you're paying what the market demands for someone of caliber. But I want you to value me. And they left. So my sense is that please let's understand, and please let this podcast proclaim writ large, reward is not just about money. It includes money, but it's just one ingredient.
Yeah, and I think there is something for me that says as well that you become, when you start out, you don't have, I wouldn't say credibility in the bank, but your leverage is limited. You're new in, you haven't got a stock yet or a brand, versus, no, I've been in this game now for a decade. I know my value and worth.
Yeah, it's a buyer's market when you're at the start.
It's a buyer's market for me to a point, or I've been earning a significant amount of money. So as long as I've not overextended myself, I'm now in a good spot. So
once I've proven myself, it's a seller's market. It's now up to me who I work with.
Yeah, I'm here now because I want to be, maybe my mortgage is relatively, if I've gone for the mansion, then I've made a rod for my own back and all that. But so there is something about you're much more aware of this than me, junior doctors. Right. Now, what goes on with that? Because to me, you hear these stories about, people who are literally working to the ends of the earth because you brought up that, it is vocational. That is, hey, I particularly in the NHS, right? I could go no doubt and do other things, but this is a calling as much as anything else. It may be a stepping stone to other things in later life, but is that this kind of, look, you're a doctor, you knew what you were getting into, you're paid very well, look at what nurses earn compared to what you earn, what do you mean you're working long hours, suck it up. Is this the same thing, as in it's relatively abusive?
It certainly can be. It was a whole lot worse. The generation of doctors that retired 10 years ago, they came up through rotations that were absolutely abusive. They would be working 100-hour weeks. There were rotations, on-call rotations, where you're on call every other night. It's exhausting. And interestingly, some of them even reduced their dissonance about those things by saying how profitable it was, therefore, to be able to make good decisions when you're exhausted. The thought that maybe you'd make better decisions if you weren't exhausted at all, can get lost in all of that. But the point is that the expectations came from people who had even worse times. And so that set of expectations gets dumped on the next generation, and it became self-perpetuating. Now, employment law won't allow that kind of abuse to go on. And the current generation of junior doctors, and I'm in touch with them in two ways. One is that my daughter and her friends are junior doctors, and my son-in-law is about to become a consultant. And she's now a GP, so she's gone through the junior doctor ranks, but she's only just recently come out of them. And the other thing is that I'm a trustee of the Royal College of GPs, and we hear feedback from the members. What we're hearing is that that old set of expectations won't work anymore. People want to live a balanced life. They're willing to work their socks off. They really are, but they want to feel that equity theory kicks in again, that they're getting an equitable deal for what they put in.
My life can't start when I hit 40 and I've got senior. I've got to have a life leading up to that, right?
That's exactly right. And does a doctor go, let's imagine they say, this isn't for me anymore. Well, they are university graduates, but they might years into their career, can they compete for jobs with folks who are engineers and 10 years into their career? No, they can't. They haven't got a degree in engineering. There's a whole lot of walks of life, even though these people are bright as buttons and massively highly and the other thing is that at the moment, certainly in general practice, one of the elements of the package deal is that yes, I will work my socks off because at least the patients appreciate what I do. What's happening at the moment is, my daughter tells me, just about every consultation on the phone starts with an angry patient who believes that the GPs are not giving them a fair crack of the whip by not seeing them face to face. They believe they're being lazy. So what part of the reward package deal was status, esteem, being valued by the patient community. That has now dropped because of the erroneous belief that the GPs are not working hard enough. Actually, they're working way harder than they did before, and they can't wait to get back to face-to-face consultations because they're much more efficient in terms of time. They're less efficient for the patients, but they're much more efficient for the medics. The medics can't wait to get back to face-to-face consultations, but the health service restricts freedom of choice. So again, my plea, please think about what's the package deal? What do I get out for what I put in?
So there is a duty of care here that has to balance that. When anything isn't quite right, there's always going to be a spectrum of truths. Those that are going to be maybe almost submissive to waiting to find out if things change. There are going to be those that will have a sense of, this isn't right, we need to make change, let's be fair and reasonable. And then there's going to be and I don't want to use the word extremist, it's just a word that leapt into the more extreme end of the spectrum, I guess, that it takes it too far, as in that makes it unpalatable for those that are trying to change to be the first, to be the very first step we make. That's too big. But there is something about each generation as they get into that position of being the decision makers, I guess, bringing change in. So we started with Xavier, talking about that, and he's in his 60s. So, I suppose what you've got there is two things. Number one is you may have an individual, regardless of age, who has the empathy and the insight and the wherewithal to go, well, maybe we won't say, hey, it's a 39-hour week, but let's bring you down to, I don't want anybody in this business working more than, let's say, 60 hours. Or whatever that number may be. So still a little bit unreasonable, but not really unreasonable, versus waiting then for that we've got to wait a decade for somebody else to come into that position that's been waiting to do so. So, maybe there's something about that. The people in positional power, I guess, looking through their own lens versus trying to have that empathy and looking through the lens of the other person.
I
to the party.
I think it comes down to a very simple question. And that is, if I could talk to that fine gentleman, I would say to him, I would say, what's your theory about what brings out the best in your people? Because That's what every employer needs to have in their head. I've got a theory about what brings out the best in my people, and I'm going to implement that theory. Yeah? So here's one package deal. I'll give them a whole stack of money, but they have to do exactly what I want, however unreasonable that is. Here's another potential package deal. I'll talk to them and we'll work out a reasonable balance between reward, which is financial, time, esteem, job choice, control over their own working day. There's a whole bunch of ingredients we can put in there. Let's talk to each other and find the best way of creating conditions that people love to work in, because then they'll give their best.
You see, and there's absolutely nothing to argue with there. There is no probable, I'm sure somebody's got one, but there is no real counterweight to it. And yet what you see is, of course, there's a spectrum. There always is, of great leaders who have the empathy and go, listen, I'm going to push you hard, I'm going to work you hard, but the pay is going to be commensurate, and etc. So we'll try and get the balance right. We'll never probably get it perfect, but there'll be ebbs and flows where it seems fair, and then probably sometimes not. But it should equal out over a 12-month period. Okay, boom. And then you have employees that, guess what? There are behavioral characteristics that come from people where they see people as being lazy. If you don't work them hard, then the word on the street is, and I don't know if it's true, that Jeff Bezos says, I don't really want people in junior ranks in this organization for more than 3 years, because after that they settle in. And they become lazy. Well, there's something there that says he either has seen that or has experienced it or just believes it to be true. But there isn't, as you say, either the coach. I mean, you could argue, Jeff Bezos really doesn't care, mate. Look at what he's doing. But he doesn't care about the damage that he's causing. He doesn't care about the culture that he's creating, because nobody has said, so what about when you've invested 3 years in somebody, they understand the politic, they understand how it all works. What would be the next step of engagement for somebody to reconnect them or to keep them in hue? So back to the question, has anybody done a cost-benefit analysis about replacing people on a rotation versus keeping them in and they're connected and engaged? Or are you just going to go down your confirmation bias and you're going to go, right, but I can run the business like this because there is always somebody else trying to come in. So I do get away with it because there is within reason, there's an endless resource.
Yeah, and let's face it, the markets are always doing this, right? And the market for people does that as well. If you realize that an awful lot of people want work in your organization and there's only a finite limited number of places in it, you can get away with blue murder if you're minded to do so, because people will put up with anything because it may be the only employer in town. Certain small towns are dominated by one big employer. Yep. You lose your job there, you're sunk. You've got to go and live somewhere else probably. But the question, what do you think brings out the best in your people? That's the question that we've got to encourage more employers to ask. And I hope you don't mind, but do you remember, I've got this new book coming out called Work-Life Balance, and it's all about this sort of stuff. There's this whole process called job crafting, which encourages people to have conversations at work about where they get the buzz from and what drains them, and can we adjust each job so that it gives people more of the buzz and less of the drain, and yet still get all the work done. And what's interesting, you said, is there research about this? And there is. And in the book, we cite a stack of it. But basically, when people get involved in job crafting, not only do they express more satisfaction with the work they do, but they actually seem to put in more, because equity theory works the other way as well. So if now I believe I've got an employer who is really bending over backwards to accommodate me, then I'm going to be loyal to that employer, put more in, bring more of myself to work and so on. And that seems to be the kind of reciprocity that you can create. But who do you expect to go first in that? Of course, the leaders.
So, that Daniel Pink autonomy, mastery, purpose kind of principle, which says, look, if you give me those three things, autonomy to have a sense of my own direction within boundaries, mastery, I'm getting better, and purpose, there's a why I can connect to beyond just task output, then, as long as the pay is correct, then that is the counterweight, almost what you were saying about, what else is there beyond, the pay here that you want from within the role. So I hear that. And I think maybe the big action or the big thought here is for those leaders that either are inherently like that, this is a no-brainer. For those that have coaches, or they embark on reading a book, or there's a podcast that they listen to, maybe it's this one, it might be a trigger for, do you know what? How much more effort does it actually take to control a workforce or to make demands of them than it does to actually engage them? Well, the answer is, the chances are, if you actually looked at the effort involved, probably no less or no more. It's just that you have an inherent, call it bias or experience, or it's the only life you've led. Therefore, hey, but almost the phrase I've almost got here is, how's that working out for you?
No, dead right. And you're right, because you're making it into an empirical question. You can actually see the effect of what you're doing. One aphorism that I coined a little while ago was that if all you get from a job is money, it has to be an awful lot.
Yeah.
But certainly when I was an HR director, I advised the organization that I was working for to pay absolutely the market average, and then put around that other terms and conditions that people wanted. In fact, I made it the mission for my HR team that the way we led and managed our people should become a source of competitive advantage for our organization. The way we led and managed our people, a source of competitive advantage for our people.
Yeah. If we make this a place where people want to work, then we can't underpay. We can't make it. I'd love to work there.
No, that would be abusive. It'd be abusive if we underpay them. Yeah. If we pay it absolutely at the market median,
yeah,
fine.
Would you like to earn more? Yeah, of course you would do. However, let's make it fair and reasonable. Because actually, if we go down that path of paying people a lot, then eventually, as long as they haven't overextended themselves, the majority will have enough. Yep. And at that point, that's when the money will then stop being its own value. So it's only a short-term deal.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. When I was working in the Far East, working with Cathay Pacific Airways a number of years ago, I remember the chief exec was a guy called Rod Eddington, who came to run British Airways eventually. But he was very articulate about this notion of the package deal. One of the things we said to the cabin crew community, who are, of course, because they go off on long haul trips and they mix with other cabin crew in hotels down route and so on, they were obviously aware of other elements of reward that other airlines paid. And I remember that the conversation that we had to keep having, because they would say things like, Singapore Airlines get this, and they would mention one aspect of the package deal that Singapore Airlines provided for their people. But what we had to keep offering back was, look, okay, but they do better on this variable, but they do less well on this variable. Would you want to completely switch to the Singapore Airlines terms and conditions? Almost never did the answer come back yes, because one of the things Cathay had done was kind of weigh the various elements for the vast majority of the crew.
It's an overall value.
Yeah, and so for most of them, most of the time, the package deal really worked. But if you try to cherry pick one term and condition or another one over here, one little element of reward, because airlines can't let their rewards get completely out of kilter with the market, to give more here, you've probably got to take away a bit more there. So the question is, have we got the right blend?
So I buy into all of that. And I think this is where, again, every organization, just like every household, right? It's a different feel. there's a different environment going on. You go into 10 people's houses and you go, you get a sense of the environment, whether or not the kids are being shouted at or whether or not they're being engaged with, whether or not the father or the mother is sitting in the corner on their phone, not speaking to their kids, or whether or not they're having conversations with them, and you get everything, you get that feel. And again, I think what I have here, my alarm going off. I think what I have here is a sense of there will always be, until we were moving to a nirvana state, the outliers of the organization that totally gets it and bends over backwards to try and make the environment as sensibly engaging as it can do with the package and the culture and the environment. And they may go too far sometimes and get it wrong, or they may, whatever. Then you've got the organization that couldn't really care less. It's absolutely, you're being paid a significant amount of money, suck it up, buttercup. We don't want to hear any kind of pushback because of how much we think we're paying you. So then there's a bulk of organizations in the middle that aren't a kibbutz, but they're not a dystopian kind of autocracy. They're that midpoint, and the majority are trying their best to get the balance right.
That's right. But the key, of course, to that is that no one in authority can make that decision on their own. What they need to do is to keep talking. Talk to people, because they will tell you. You said we can't see what's in someone's mind. No, but it often comes out of here. If we will just give them the opportunity to talk to us about the kind of terms and conditions in the organization. Of course, there's always a chorus. Oh, we'd like more money. We'd like more money. Okay, but our undertaking to you, it seems to be reasonable if an employer says, look, we will not let you fall behind the market. That's our promise to you. But what we want to do is to think about what else can we put around that so that you love to come to work and love what you do here.
Now, that transparency, I often think, is strangely missing, where what happens is that conversation is had, but it's not passed down as the reasoning behind the structure. Well, let's pay people fairly, but let's try and make an environment that brings a nice counterbalance to that. Yeah. Actually, I don't see, and of course I'm sure it happens, but I don't see inherently that explanation going out to people. Let's be clear. We are not going to pay you the upper quartile. We are going to hold in the middle. But here's the counterweight to that. We're going to put as much effort into the following. Blah, blah, blah. Now, some people do, but I think a big trick is missed when that's actually the intent, but you're not explaining to people what it is that you're trying to do.
No, that's dead right.
And so they don't see it.
Making salary policy or reward policy explicit is really part of treating people as grown-ups.
Yes.
And I do know of one of my clients who said, look, we're going to pay at the 75th percentile. So you are going to be just inside the upper quartile of the distribution. So we're going to pay at the 75th percentile, but we're going to ask you to make sure that you're putting in more than the average effort and contribution in kind of balancing that out. But we're willing to push. We'll take the decision first. We will pay at that 75th percentile. Will you please make sure that you're giving your absolute level best? Otherwise, we can't maintain that level of reward.
And I'm always intrigued by people that push for a significant amount of money, where I do go, there is a phrase, be careful what you ask for. Because actually it's a true test of, are you asking to be paid at that level? And because if that is the Formula One level, the Premier League level, whatever the phrase is, if you want to be paid the best, are you truly willing to give of yourself to that level constantly, consistently?
Yeah.
Or on reflection, would you, it's almost like, do you want a sofa that looks awesome? Or would you like a really comfy one? Well, because you've got to sit in that a lot. If you're going to be here for 5 years, what's your plan? If it's a stepping stone to greater things, pay me what I'm worth, but well, fine, that's your vacation. But if you're going to be here you're not planning to move, it's a great organization. What are you really pushing for here? Because you could actually make the job unenjoyable for yourself by pushing yourself to a level where the expectation now takes away your ability to actually enjoy where you are, because you're on the hook for constant awesomeness.
Right. But I think also this, be wary of seduction. Seduction is a massively powerful motivator. And, I do know of someone who straight out of university got an incredibly well-paid job as an executive assistant. I mean, not a secretary, but someone who really, was more than a bag carrier, but working for the CEO of a major organization. And as a result was paid an awful lot of money. Stayed in that job for a while. It became rather abusive, left it, went for another job that was the same, a senior executive assistant to a major player in a big organization. Now, a few years later, what that person has realized is that they've backed themselves into a career cul-de-sac. They haven't learned. They've not been a line manager. They've not run a department. There's an awful lot of things they haven't done. Yes, they've been exposed at a very high level to big strategic issues, but no one would put them into a strategy director job, however bright they are, because they've just not proven their worth as a number one in any job. They've always been a number two. And so that seduction was a financially based seduction. But having fallen for it, they're now backed into a corner. And my sense is that chap just has to step back a bit and come again through another route, earning probably in the next job rather less, but where part of the reward is the development that takes you to another level.
I'm always, and as we come to probably a bit of a natural conclusion on this, I'm always intrigued by the person. I can safely say this because it was over a decade ago that it happened. And they said to me, Guy, I'm in a situation where, I'm not enjoying the role anymore, and a whole load of things that came with it. So what's your sort of financial situation? Money in the bank, mortgage paid off? Because, this person's age and, No, I've just bought it was in the US. I bought it's basically a ranch guy and this, that, and the other. I went, right. So I got a massive mortgage on it. And I was like, right. And again, what you've done is, who needed a ranch, dude? I mean, you may have wanted it, and I've got the speedboat, you see, and well, it's not a speedboat, it's more of a cruiser, really, Guy. I'm like, yeah. Now listen, I'm not a life coach, right? But can I just say, I can see what you've done here, and
yes. That's might not be the wisest thing in the world.
Yeah, there is a way of you getting out of this. What's that? Downsizing, my friend. Taking that angst away. And he looked at me and went, "Oh no, I can't do that."
Yeah.
And that was all about self-validity. That was all about perception in his peer group. That was all about even having to admit to his own family, I may not want to operate at this level. There's a whole load of stuff that was wound up in, and I don't think it's spoken about a lot, but I think it's almost like when young footballers earn a lot of money, the quality football clubs sit them down and go, now you're not all going to listen to this, right? But you could break your leg tomorrow and be done. So yeah, go bonkers for a few months if you want to, but then let's understand, you need to put money aside. You need to not get yourself into a position where you rely on the paycheck. Some of you, I mean, it's a 1% that you got here in the first place, and it's a 1% of that 1% that you'll be here in 10 years. Yeah. So, and some pay attention, some lose their marbles and go bonkers for a day. But there's something about that. I wonder what education we give those execs that says you're coming up. Just don't put yourself into a financial situation where you need this job. Put yourself into a situation where you can say no. Well, because actually you're then more valuable to us because we'll hear your true voice.
We've said before, but it's worth repeating, that quality of life is probably best defined by the number of salient choices you can make. Yeah. So if you back yourself into the corner where you can't make choices anymore, your quality of life has just gone down, whatever your income.
Yeah. I think we end on that note. Boom. So listen, David, thanks for that conversation. Sure. Again, what we do with these things, they're for reflection. They're hopefully catalytic. They're, if nothing else, they're to enable people to nod and go, I actually think that, or maybe that's something I can reflect on and think on. But we'll meet back again in due course. But thanks for joining me on this episode. That's it, so I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share so others get to hear about us, and subscribe so you keep up to date on new episodes. Also visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with me and find out more about executive coaching, team effectiveness and changing culture. Oh, and of course you can buy my book Living Brave Leadership on Amazon. So on that note, see you soon.